everyone, welcome back. Well, we've been through the election campaign. We certainly put in a lot of hard work for that, and a lot of you did as well. This is the first podcast after the campaign. We have a guest with us, a young man, Liam Mosson, who's politically active. He's going to introduce himself in a minute. So it's really good being able to talk to someone that age, find out more about why they think the way they think, what motivates them, and what he thinks of the campaign and the strategies and the tactics. So it's a really interesting chat that we had with him. Subsequent to actually the chat, Fiona discovered some statistics about that really kind of go into who voted and why they voted.
We're probably going to do this in two parts because the conversation we had with Liam was very much the three of us discussing our reactions to events and also our thoughts on strategy, what worked, what didn't, quite high level. What we're going to do as a follow-up episode, probably in a few weeks' time, is have a deeper dive into the actual statistics around the election and who voted what and different things. But for this one, it's much more conversational, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. We found it very interesting, as always, speaking to somebody considerably younger than us.
Yes, indeed, yes.
This episode is called Election Autopsy, and there won't be any distressing medical views, we can say.
It was Liam's phrase, and we went, oh, that's quite a good one, isn't it?
So let's invite Liam into the studio. First of all, would you like to introduce yourself, Liam? Tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Fiona. First of all, thank you to Fiona and Marlene for having me on. I found the podcast a few podcasts back, been watching, really enjoy it, and thought it would be a great opportunity to go on and talk about some Scottish politics. A little bit with myself, I studied Scottish politics and international relations at the University of Strathclyde, have campaigned for a host of pro-independence parties over the last few years, and thought this would be a great platform to come on and maybe shake things up with a few controversial opinions.
Oh, like the sound of that.
Are you doing a postgraduate course now, or are you doing something else?
After university, I took my backpack and went travelling. I only got back last Monday from Hong Kong. Currently everything's up in the air. I'm looking at maybe getting back to do a master's back at Strathclyde, hopefully.
So does that mean you came into contact with John Curtis?
Oh, I've sat in many a panel with John Curtis at university. I remember having a very heated debate with John Curtis after the 2021 election, after the Independent Green Voice had snatched a seat from the Scottish Green Party in the South Scotland region. And me and John Curtis had very different views on the relevance of the Independent Green Voice at the time. Although I'm going to sound quite cocky here, he has came on to my side of that argument now. So I think that might be Liam 1, John Curtis now. I regret saying that one already.
Yeah. But that's interesting because one of the Green Holyrood candidates, well, she's just been elected for the south of Scotland, Laura Moody. She was the Green candidate back in 2021, and she missed out because of that. So what did you think then about this last election that we've just come out of?
I think it was probably horrifyingly dull. I think it's almost exactly what I had expected going into it. I had posted on social media about 48 hours prior to the vote a sort of rough expectation, and out with Reform, pretty much most parties aligned with that. I expected Reform to do slightly better. I think the top line message that I would have is it was great nights for the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. A pretty below par, albeit still a strong showing from Reform. And when it comes to the SNP, they've ticked all the boxes for what they had to do in that election, maybe just short of a majority, but I don't think that was ever likely. I think the key takeaway is actually how far Scottish Labour's fell. They've declined every election now, haven't they, since the formation of Holyrood? And I mean, if it was looking any better south of the border, it would be curtains for Sarwar, but he looks like he's going to hold on, doesn't he?
I think probably only because there's more distraction from down south, I think, at the minute. As we speak, Keir is still the Prime Minister, but by the end of the podcast, who knows? I was watching some of the SNP guys get sworn in. And it did occur to me that this is a very different crowd that we've got in at Holyrood now, and quite an exciting, quite a good bunch. Something is going to come as a result of what was a bit of a dull campaign, but actually has it opened some doors for us that maybe we weren't expecting.
Yeah, I think on two counts with that, you've got 64 new MSPs in this parliament. That's the largest group of new MSPs out with the first parliament. A much younger parliament, and I think that's good. I think we need a fresh injection of ideas. The parliament has gotten a little bit stale recently. With the SNP as well, there was a mixed night, wasn't there? There was some results. I think we look at Angus Robertson in Edinburgh Central and think he'll be a large loss to the parliament. Losing out in the Western Isles was a tricky one to take. But on the flip side, what you're saying is we've seen some excellent politicians be returned to Holyrood. Obviously, Stephen Flynn's the headline. I mean, everyone's delighted to see Stephen Flynn come back to Parliament. I think Stephen Geffins is actually a really underrated return to Parliament. I'm a Glaswegian, and I'm absolutely delighted to see David Linden and Alison Fewless both returned to the Scottish Parliament as well. And Alison didn't just win her seat, she romped that seat. It was one of only 2 seats that the SNP had an increased vote share on 2021. That's the new Glasgow Central constituency, and she'll be a fantastic MSP for Glasgow Central.
That was one of the things that struck me, that there's this, I mean, it's not loads and loads, but it's a significant number of people who are formerly MPs coming through. And of course, I suppose, like with Alison, if there hadn't been that awful, from SNP's point of view, awful election 2 years ago, she'd still be down south. And so in a way, that kind of upset down there has, as it's turned out, released people to come up. Alan Smith's another one, former MP.
Neil Gray as well,
Neil Gray, Martin Day. They're new to Holyrood, but they're really experienced politicians. They've managed to weather being down in Westminster, and knows how that works. It must enable them to kind of hit the ground running, really. And there's also folk like Heather Anderson, who's in Dundee West, just elected. She was a former MEP. I just think that just opens up possibilities for Mr. Swinney. I'm looking forward to seeing who he puts in his. I was
wondering if we would go into the cabinet. I've got a wish list for the cabinet.
Go on then. Who would you put in? What's your dream?
The first thing I would say,
cabinet? Just
to follow on to what Marlene said, because we've lost so many of the big hitters in Holyrood as well. People like Kate Forbes standing down, Shona Robinson standing down. So to get that injection of experience is really important. I think it'll be really interesting to see where Stephen Flynn fits in the cabinet. Because under no circumstances would he want many of those big briefs that come with a lot of negative press. My initial thought was, would he take up the Angus Robertson role of the Constitution with maybe a slot of Deputy First Minister as well? But then I think that would be really harsh on Mary McCallum.
And also, he's got to get his feet under the table first, hasn't he? He's new to Holyrood. I don't think he could just walk in and take over a big portfolio.
Although that's interesting, you thought Stephen for that one, because I thought Alan Smith for that one. Angus Robertson's gone. I mean, so I thought, maybe.
I actually wouldn't be shocked if John Swinney combined that brief with something else. I mean, there has been heavy rumours that John Swinney wants to slim the cabinet as well, which I don't think would be a bad thing.
Well, except some of those are very, very big portfolios, and when you cram them together, something misses out, doesn't it? But I suppose if he wants fewer people in the cabinet, that's the only choice he's got. I
also wonder if Stephen Flynn stood at his acceptance speech for Aberdeen, and the first comment out of his mouth was that he would be the main fighter for the oil industry in Aberdeen, that he would stand up and fight for the oil industry. And I think that sort of aligns more with a sort of Swinney viewpoint of the SNP than what perhaps the previous Nicola Sturgeon or Hamza Youssef, more green-leaning SNP had done. I wonder if there's a role for him in some sort of economic energy portfolio, just based on those comments.
I'm not sure that is really the way I would want them to go, to be honest. And I think with such a strong showing from the Greens, and they are going to need Green support to get some things across the line. So I wonder if that sort of initial approach, I get why they're saying it, especially for an Aberdeen constituency, But I wonder if that is going to have to get a little bit tempered a little bit.
My only wish list for Stephen Flynn is that he's in the cabinet. Stephen Flynn has to be front and centre of that cabinet, because he's the best messenger the SNP have out of their entire group at Holyrood, in my opinion. Alison Fulis, I wonder if there's a role for Alison as well. Alison took the case for the safe drug consumption rooms to Westminster. She done a very good job at Westminster advocating for drug safety policies. And that's almost been a little bit of a... No one's wanted to touch that portfolio at Holyrood with the drug deaths record that the SNP, I would say, inherited. It's not something that's easily fixed. I do wonder if a Glasgow-based MSP with the experience in that field, someone like an Alison Fulis would take over that sort of role. In terms of the bigger ministries, though, you've got obviously the Finance Ministry. Shona Robinson's left that one empty. You've got, does Neil Gray stay on in health? I think there's lots of questions for John Swinney where he bleeds in these new MSPs. Who does he stay loyal to? It wouldn't shock me in some of these more controversial appointments whether he was to reach out to the Lib Dems in the North East. So, for example, if Stephen Flynn was to take a ministry that would have any form of influence over energy or economic issues, would you lean towards the Liberal Democrats for support for past budgets before? And they probably wouldn't be as left-leaning on environmental issues, which is something I do think the SNP struggles with.
I think it does, yeah. And I mean, the finance one you mentioned there as well, that we have had doubts, haven't we, Marlene, over the past bit about the approach that the SNP takes. It's a very traditional sort of financial view, whereas we have spoken to several people in the MMT field, for example, who are not happy with the way the SNP approaches it. And, you know, this sort of selling off all our assets and I think is problematic. And I don't know who really you would hand that to, because the folk who've come up from Westminster, that won't have been anything that they would have covered, even though they had sort of lead, you know, roles. Finance, I don't think, would have been one of them, unless one of them was a shadow budget secretary. I can't remember.
I think Alison Fulis had some. She was a finance spokesman for them down at that point, wasn't she? I mean, more recently. I mean, it's just interesting, isn't it? It's like, I noticed you, like you sort of said, Liam, about a boring kind of campaign, and I don't know if I thought it was boring exactly, but once the day after the election, once we knew where we were, I just felt a bit, the SNP have got fewer, which is a shame. Greens maybe in some ways, benefited from that because they've picked up some seats or in areas, regions that, you might have thought the SNP might have got. So Greens have come through. That's a really good thing. I mean, I just think, the Greens do a good job in Parliament of, being a presence who sort of nudges the SNP into, pushes them to get them a bit more radical in how they go about things. I mean, I'm saying radical, a bit more left-wing, but just kind of a bit more radical. So that's good that they're there. And then, and then there's, as you say, Labour going down, election after election after election, and suddenly we've got however many reform MSPs. God, I just felt a bit deflated after it. And then you look at what's happening down in London, another round of chaos I just think Labour Party have brought it on themselves. There's no need for it. They don't have to do all that stuff. They're in chaos. We've got a majority up here that wants in Holyrood, that would push for independence, and they're about to step off another cliff. So I'm a bit tired of it and a bit deflated. Really.
I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think on many merits there's good reason to be deflated. Not much has changed in the grand scheme of things. And I felt certainly deflated at certain points following the election. One of the things that I do look at, and I do take it as a positive, Reform didn't have the breakthrough in Scotland that Reform really wanted in breakthrough.
No, they didn't get any constituencies.
Not a single constituency. I will not forget the cheers as the North, it was the Banff and Buchan.
Oh, yes.
seat came in.
Karen
I think it was
a
majority of about 320 something for the SNP. That was a delightful moment. But not only did Reform not get the breakthrough, the right-wing bloc in Parliament actually decreased in its number of seats. So the Conservatives collectively had 31 seats following the last election. Now the right-wing bloc of the Conservatives, who are basically Reform light at this stage, with Reform as a combination, are 29. So that's a win. That's certainly something we need to look at. And Scotland firmly rejected Reform. They might be sitting in the official opposition benches at Holyrood, but 17 seats from a 129 seat parliament is not a good outcome for the party that wanted to radicalise Scottish politics. And we've seen a lot of movement in favour of the sort of more progressive parties as well. I mean, Lib Dem's gaining seats and the Greens gaining seats. I think that's certainly something to look at. You mentioned independence majority. It's the largest independence majority in terms of MSPs at any parliament we've had. So I mean, lots of positives to look at. Whether it moves the goalposts on independence is a different question.
I'm not at all deflated by the results, and I haven't felt deflated by them because, just watching all those fresh faces come in, and the Greens already, not only did they get 2 actual constituencies for the first time, which was a great result, and I'm pleased Lorna Slater got in there, and I won't say anything bad about Angus Robertson, but I'm pleased Lorna got in. But the thing, they've already started off in how they've taken on the Electoral Commission over that independent Green voice, calling for the resignation of the chief exec. I love that sort of punchy, combative thing, and they're not falling into the trap that Labour did of trying to make their point by running down Scotland. They're actually focusing on things that we would all agree just don't seem right. But then the other big thing for me is 3 of the 4 bits of the UK have got nationalist governments in them, and already that feels different to me. The fact you've got 3 of them, you could imagine them getting together and just the mischief they could create, especially when there's chaos down the road. Now's a good time to be making ructions, because do it while your enemy's scattered to the 4 winds.
What did you think of the strategy that came from the SNP, whoever, Mr. Swinney and his advisors, about going for SNP 1 and 2? Now, I understand, right? You're the First Minister, you're the leader of the SNP. Of course, you want people to vote for SNP. Of course, they'll say that. But the thing that puzzled me was then they linked it and said, because we had a majority in the Parliament in 2011, that was pretty well said. That was the cause of us getting the referendum. So if we have that again, that will be the cause of us getting another referendum. And to me, that always seemed like, well, I don't even think it was true that it was, of course, it was a factor, but there was not just one factor that brought about that Section 30.
2 things. The first thing is that flat out, when a majority of MSPs are elected on a mandate for independence referendum, that should constitute a mandate for independence referendum, regardless of what John Swinney says. Now, I've been an SNP member for God knows how long, and I think that was one of the biggest strategic blunders that the SNP have made in God knows how long, because he's handed the line to the Westminster parties and to the media. And despite the fact that I completely disagree with that aspect, because I think a majority of pro-independence MSPs should be enough to constitute a referendum, I think, unfortunately, he's tied one hand behind his own back. I think it's been very unlikely that we get a referendum this Parliament, regardless of who Labour elects, probably Andy Burnham as their next leader. The SNP can't come out actively and advocate for voters to vote for other parties on the list. Perfectly accept that.
Absolutely, we get
perfectly accept that. But they don't need to be as gung-ho in the vote SNP constituency. And I don't think the SNP should be advocating for some of these smaller parties that do not have the infrastructure or the funding or the vetting processes in place. The Scottish Greens are a different argument.
Yeah.
If you really want to make your manifesto and your platform about independence, you can't just deal with the Greens after the fact. You have to work with them before the fact.
Yeah.
But I don't think this election really was about independence. And I think one of the stats I did look at prior to coming on here was some of the sub-tabs on the polling data from both Survation and YouGov in their final polls prior to the parliamentary election just passed. Of the Labour vote, and this is an aggregate across the two polls, of the Labour vote, 20% of Labour voters lean yes on the independence question, 14% are undecided. Of the Liberal Democrat vote, 17.5% lean yes on the independent question, 16.5% undecided. The one that actually blew my mind the most, though, and I think this is actually where John Swinney's made a second strategic blunder post-election, is that 22.5% of Reform voters lean yes on the independence question. 11% are undecided. Now, the SNP should not be dealing with Reform in Holyrood. Absolutely, I don't have a single policy alignment with Reform. I just want to clarify. However, the second strategic blunder was not inviting them to that Butte House conversation. Because Reform would have rejected that claim anyway. Reform have stated throughout their campaign that they don't want to work with the SNP. And actually, one of the things that I do, I don't want to come across as if I'm spouting unionist media lies, because I think the way it's been spun by the unionist media has been as I would have expected it to have been spun. But surely someone in the SNP's strategist team looks at the number of votes that the SNP and the independence campaign can win from Reform. I don't know how you can look at that number and basically say, we don't care. We don't care what you think. I don't like that approach. Put the ball back in Reform's court, make them reject the meeting. So, to the first question Marlene asked, the small parties, I do think they're irrelevant out with the Green Party. I think the SNP has to work closer with the Greens. I think the SNP 1-2 strategy doesn't work, but they've sort of tied their own hands with their election strategy. John Swinney should never in a million years have said a majority constitutes a mandate. And ultimately, yes, an independence majority, regardless of which politicians and parties make up that majority, should always constitute a mandate. Yeah. And that's just a tidbit about Reform at the end there.
But I think that is interesting. It really is interesting. And I think the point about, although we were very critical of John, and for exactly that reason, it's your sort of once in a generation line he was handing them. But I do notice that since the election, nobody's talking about that. Certainly not in the SNP or on our side. They're talking about a majority of independents, MSPs, and that's also echoing what's happened in Wales and what's happening in Ireland. So I think that conversation has moved on. So I suspect he's dodged a bullet on that one. The 22% of Reform indie supporting is an interesting one as well, because I wonder if it's that kind of the anti-establishment, just burn it down and start again, whatever way that takes it. But I think your point is absolutely right about, I didn't like the optics of saying, I'm not going to deal with Reform, not because I want him to deal with Reform, the politicians. I think he has to say something about the people who voted for them, because he is their First Minister as well. If we want to, get that yes vote up, those are the people who we need to pull into the fold, pull away from the dark side, and actually find out why they went for Reform. And that is something that I've been having a chat with a few people about, who makes up that group of people who voted Reform. And there will be, I think, a number of them who are pure out-and-out racist bampots. Yeah. Put that to one side. There's also the sort of people whose life is just so difficult and see so little hope of anything changing, that they're of the just chuck them all out, they're all terrible, it can't be any worse than it is now. And that's a group that are absolutely crying out for help. And then there's probably another group of, as you said, Tories who are attracted to Reform because they see the Tories falling apart.
If you had told me the SNP were winning above 45 seats at this election, I would have laughed your head off. John Swinney's done an incredible job. But one of the downsides of John Swinney is he's predictable. Everyone knows who John Swinney is. He's the safe pair of hands. And I think in that moment, the SNP needed that. And he's done a great job. what I would say, you have asked the question is, look, why are people voting Reform? I think the answer is very clear and green. In England, between the Greens and Reform, I think that actually highlights the microcosm that we have a slightly different dynamic in Scotland because we have a slightly different politics in Scotland. But the arguments maintain the same. Because the wave of Reform support, yeah, you're always going to have the small number who are out and out racist, the Tommy Robinson fanboys, the ones who are probably now shifting to Rupert Lowe. And we should never be engaging with that crowd. That's not the crowd. But we don't want your votes, is what I would say. To the other majority of people who vote Reform, they're no different from people who vote Labour or the SNP. They see the system collapsing round about them and they want someone to fight the system and change it. Now, Nigel Farage has lied through his teeth and Malcolm Offord has lied through his teeth about how immigrants are to blame for the collapse of the system, and that is simply untrue. It's not factual and it's not grounded in any way, shape or form in the reality of the situation. But what you do see is when a left-wing or a centrist progressive alternative comes to the fore, look at Zach Polanski in England. He's doing the exact same thing Nigel Farage is doing. He's making a populist argument about how, yes, the system's broken, you're suffering, and how we're going to break the system. The only difference is he's blaming millionaires and billionaires and not immigrants. And
he's got something a bit positive as the outcome as well, isn't he? Yeah.
And I think what people want is people don't want stability. People want a fighter. Like, I don't think it matters whether you're left-wing, right-wing, centrist, progressive, conservative, liberal, illiberal, autocratic, whatever you want to go with. People just want someone that's seen to fight for them when they can't afford the most basic of necessities. And that's why Polanski's popular. It's why Euroworth, the Plaid leader in Wales, is popular. It's why in America, it's why when you look at the host of Democratic candidates being elected in America, why it doesn't really matter what background they're from. It's the ones that are willing to fight the system that are breaking through. And I think step one for John Swinney was restoring trust in the SNP, restoring the base, and he's done that extraordinarily well. Step two for John Swinney, if he's serious about independence, is, okay, you've got the base back on board, but let's take the fight. Let's take the fight to Westminster. Take the fight to Reform. Prove to those Reform voters why your progressive message for change is better than their racist message for change. And that's what I want to see from the SNP moving forward.
I want that as well, because I particularly want John Swinney. We've said before, what he has to have is an answer when down the road say, no, you're not getting another referendum, even with your mandate, even with 3/4 of the UK wanting out, you're not getting one. There has to be a consequence for that being said. And I would like to see him get down and dirty and start really fighting back. And if that's not within his wheelhouse, put somebody else in charge of that who will. And we've got some big hit. I mean, this is where I think Stephen Flynn could come into his own, because he's great for the sort of stab and run, approach. but there's a lot of them in there who I think could well stand up for ourselves. But there has to be, because the only reason that mandate hasn't counted for anything so far is because we haven't responded when we've had a no. We've just gone, oh, all right, then we'll ask again in 5 years' time. That has to be different this time.
Well, I think that's true of, say, the last Holyrood Parliament, so 2021 onwards. I mean, to be fair, there was such a lot of stuff happening before that. From 2015, almost all MPs went down south. They were SNP. But then, the year after that was Brexit, and that paralysed Westminster for years. And then there was COVID, and that paralysed everyone for a couple of years. Then, of course, there was the whole thing with the SNP itself kind of getting a bit tangled up. So they've got they do definitely have to start. And I think we're agreeing with one another, because it needs to start ASAP. And I mean, Swinney's has made a start, hasn't he? I mean, obviously he had a phone call with Starmer pretty soon after the election, and I think they've arranged a meeting coming up next. I think it's quite soon, next month, something like that. I mean, he's obviously going to raise the whole matter about independence. And then I know the number 10 machine came out quite quickly just to say, of course, Mr. Starmer and Labour are not in favour of independence, not in favour of another referendum. So, but that's kind of like the game, isn't it? It's just it doesn't mean they're not going to talk about it. It just means that's what they're putting out to, satisfy their own folk probably, and satisfy England maybe.
I don't think we'll have a referendum during this 5-year Parliament. And as someone who is excruciatingly desperate for a referendum, I don't say this next part lightly. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for the SNP. I don't think calling for a referendum on a polling average of 44 to 45% in favour of the yes side is a strong enough support base. I also think this is maybe what I was trying to lean into with the change in messaging from the SNP, because there is a way to get a referendum, and it's to have a mass movement of people demanding a referendum. And that does not mean any form of violence or anything. It just means having a broad church from the Greens to those reform yes voters, and everyone in between demanding a referendum. And Swinney can't do that alone. That's why I think the message inside from the Yes campaign has to be much stronger. We don't talk enough about the damage that Brexit has done. At least we don't do it in a way that people understand. It's easy to say Brexit is bad. But, I mean, I remember watching the STV debate prior to the election, and Malcolm Offer gave John Swinney a hard time on NHS waiting lists. And I was screaming at the TV from Vietnam. I was screaming. I was watching at 4 in the morning. I was screaming at the TV. I was like, John, just tell him the NHS waiting lists are coming down, but they would be coming down a hell of a lot quicker if we still had those 12% of EU staff in more hospitals. And the reason we don't have those staff is because of reforms, Ilk and Nigel Farage. And we don't tie policy back to messaging enough, I think, because I think one of the things the SNP tried to do is tell people how we're doing better than down south, how we have got this, that's better than England. See the same way people are looking for a fighter. In my view, people are not interested in being told what's good. People need a fight. Like, I know it sounds terrible, but I think political geeks, political junkies, we all know that the NHS waiting times are better in Scotland than England. We all know that we get free prescriptions and free dental and eye care, free tuition, mitigated bedroom tax, all of that. If you're a single parent struggling to feed your kids, you don't care. And we need to be making the argument that the best way to make that individual's life better, because that's the sort of demographic that votes for reform. The people are desperate for change.
Yes, indeed.
Is that independence will make your life better, because the decisions that have damaged Scotland, such as Brexit and coming out of the single market, the way we're dealing with immigration, all of that can be reverted if we're making our own choices. I also just think as well, that's why we need to be aware of what we want to say and how we actually word it so that it's digestible to the electorate. Because we're not trying to win over the 40% of the electorate that's already 100% going to vote for the independence campaign when it comes out next time round. We're trying to win over that soft yes vote, but we're not convinced yet. And I don't actually think John Swinney saying to Keir Starmer, I want a referendum does that.
I don't think it's necessarily he would be the person leading a campaign either. I mean, we've had some conversations with Gordon McIntyre-Kemp, for example, believe in Scotland. He's very interested in what Wales did for that 2 years that they actually did a whole round of citizens' assemblies. We did a podcast on it with Leanne Wood last year, was it? The year before?
Yeah.
And they took 2 years to speak to people in a variety of ways. I remember they had, expressing themselves through murals or art or dance or whatever it was. But it was about that constitutional question. And the very process of asking people to really think about what they wanted and what country they wanted to be, that in itself built a momentum for yes or for independence in Wales. And we're not coming from a standing start like perhaps they were, because we've already rehearsed a lot of these arguments. We know the ones that we still have to get better at answering, and things like the economy and currency. We know the ones that people can throw up as a smokescreen. And actually, if we could get people round a table that's not in Holyrood, that's not led by politicians, and take it topic by topic, these sticky topics, and work out what's the best way, where's the common ground in them, and where can we actually make progress that would bring people together without it necessarily being badged as an SNP initiative or a political thing at all. So I would like to see way more of that in the next couple of years, and then we'll see where we are, whether it's a referendum or a de facto or just a revolution,
I would also love to see someone, and first of all, I understand John Swinney or the cabinet cannot be the people to make this next argument. I'd love someone from the SNP to make it very clear that a vote for independence is not a vote for permanent SNP governance.
No. Vote to get rid of the SNP.
Let's be very clear, the SNP is the largest vehicle driving us towards independence. And whilst without independence, we would still probably be the party that I would align myself most closely with. Post-independence, feel free to go and vote for the Mad Racist Reform Party if you want. Post-independence, feel free to go and vote for the Communist Party. And anywhere in between. I think sometimes we get this argument wrong in Scotland, and the politicians do, where we make it, we want independence because the SNP want independence, so we want independence because the Scottish Greens want independence. We want independence to unlock Scotland's potential, and which party carries that forward post-independence is a different question whatsoever. Also,
absolutely.
on top of that, I think Paul Swinney, Glasgow list MSP, Labour MSP made a very, very good point a few days ago, where he said that the independence question is paralysed in Holyrood and Scottish politics. That much is true. I think all sides of the argument would agree on that. But we have to do something to move that impasse, and that's something. It was nice to see a pro-union politician make that comment. How genuine, okay, we'll take it at face value to start with. There has to be a mechanism in Scotland similar to what Northern Ireland has. Because that would remove the question from every election. Whereas we're sitting here arguing about what constitutes a mandate. And there has to be that mechanism. I think that would free up Scottish politics a lot more.
Yeah, I think it absolutely would. I mean, the other thing I think that would make a huge difference, and to me is one of the benefits of being independent as well, is we would have Scottish parties fighting out how best to run Scotland, because this sort of being run by the country next door with their resources pouring in and their ideology pouring in, that's paralysing as well. And I do think that the Labour Party, if they want to ever halt that slide, that trajectory they're on, the only way they can do it is to become a Scottish registered party and at least be neutral on independence, if not actually get on board with the idea. Otherwise, they're just sliding into obscurity. And
I'm not sure that I agree that Holyrood's paralysed because of the constitutional question. I mean, what's an example of that? I mean, they do, they've done land reform, okay. It could have been more reform than it was in it, but they've moved, they've done that, they've done what they could with trying to make a more progressive, tax system, income tax system. We've got some of the benefits that were transferred over to Holyrood's control. I mean, they've been pretty innovative in what they've done. You mentioned earlier, a single mum struggling to feed her wains. Yeah, but that single mum, if she's got two wains, is getting something like 50 quid a week from the Scottish child payment. So, I mean, she must know that. Maybe she doesn't know that it's just Scotland, you get it, and you don't get it if you're in England. So, I just kind of think they've actually done a lot. I'm not sure where the paralysis is.
I think fundamentally, the Scottish Parliament has delivered policy-wise significantly more than what it brags about. I mean, the messaging, I think I said earlier on, the messaging for the SNP government has always been my biggest criticism of the SNP. It's not actually what we've done in government that's my criticism. It's the fact that we don't shout home about it in a way that's digestible to voters. Where I do think there is paralysis, though, is we stand up at every single election campaign, whether it's for councils, whether it's for the Westminster Parliament, whether it's for Holyrood, And the first question any politician gets asked is what their view on the Constitution is. It should be irrelevant at council elections, and that would be taken away if there was a mechanism. The Holyrood Parliament is paralysed to an extent. Yeah, there's cross-party support for lots of policy decisions, but the argument's always framed in the context of independence. And that's something that I think I love, because I love a policy debate. The general public don't.
I don't know. I don't think it is framed in the context of independence. I think it's framed in the context of the limitation of not being independent, because that's where the paralysis is. It's the fact that we can go so far and no further on energy. Foreign policy is out with our grasp. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we have no control over just because of that constitutional thing. So it is always going to limit our ambitions. And I was really, really pleased to see the phrase that Michelle O'Neill has been using is to be freed from the constraints of the union. And I think that is really, for me, that's what it's all about. Yeah. It's to be free from the constraints. Then whatever decision we come up with, when we're making our own decisions, who knows what they'll be? You know, that's where the discussion starts. But until we can get to that point, we are stuck and we are constrained.
Yeah. I think it's a really good way of looking at it. Actually, it's that's part of the messaging argument, isn't it? That's actually a good way of framing it. Is that if you think the Scottish Parliament's stuck, then take the shackles off and let it work.
Yeah.
I wonder how different both the SNP's electoral outcome and where Scottish Labour would be had Monica Lennon won that leadership election a few years ago.
Yes,
I've got a friend,
absolutely.
One of my best friends from university is one of Monica Lennon's constituents, former constituents, I suppose now. And he was having a really, really hard time trying to decide who to vote for. He was a Labour member right up until Brexit. Always voted for the sort of Corbyn left of the Labour Party. Of Monica Lennon was a lot softer on the Constitution question. And he messaged me right before he voted and was like, I'm stood outside the polling station, I don't know who to vote for. I love Monica Lennon, but I know she would vote to return Anna Sawar as First Minister. And he voted SNP in the end. And when she got declared as losing out and she was so far down the list, she had no chance of getting in, he was genuinely upset because he campaigned for Monica Lennon. And I wonder, because we're talking about having a more inclusive parliament and a parliament that should be working better together, I think, on the centre-left. And you mentioned earlier about how Labour can't function as a party until it frees itself from the Westminster Party. Along the same lines of how we don't think Scotland can function properly until it frees itself from Westminster, the same argument applies to the Labour Party internally. I wonder if we'll see that now. I mean, Paul Swinney, whilst he was talking about independence of the Constitution question, also made that argument. I wonder if you'll see a shift from Labour, at very least someone on the Labour left, arguing for more independence from Westminster. I would welcome that.
Definitely, and it's something that the Scottish Tories have said. In fact, I think it was Murdo Fraser, most unlikely ally in independence. But if he can make the argument that they need to be independent from the Tories in order to function, multiply that up by Scotland, and there's the answer to the question. I was sorry to hear Monica Lennon didn't get her seat, because I do like Monica Lennon. I think she's had a lot of good things to say. I'm also disappointed the SSP didn't get one, because some of their policies are absolutely spot on and they work hard and they're true to their principles. And we've had several conversations with Colin Fox and a couple of other young women, very impressive young women in the SSP. And I think it's
Ali Maxwell.
Ali Maxwell, and Natalie is the other one who's. And I think that, there's your independent supporting left-wing party. I just wish more Labour supporters, that 20% who would vote yes, get them into the SSP and make that a big party.
And indeed. And I mean, I think, speaking in terms of the SNP and the Greens, but there's the SSP as well. I mean, they have had MSPs in the past. I think it was 2005 up to 2007, wasn't it? And they brought forward some really good bills that then went on and got support of other people. And when I sort of think back to then, Actually, I wasn't even living in Scotland then, but I did sort of keep in touch, and I saw, I used to see what was going on and go, that's exactly how I'd want the Scottish Parliament to work. A small party, they've got 1 or 2 members, but they've got some good ideas, and the other people come round and support it, and they amend it and it gets changed and stuff. But that's how a parliament based on a proportional voting system should be working. If we can get past this constitutional, let's call it paralysis, and become independent, then that's the kind of parliament we can have.
I also think we need to learn from the rise of it right across Europe.
And America.
Because it's not unique to Scotland. And I think we can all agree that whilst we detest reform, that the politician and the party apparatus of reform are very good at what they do.
Yes.
And when I look at France, for example, when Marine Le Pen and the National Rally rose to prominence, and the old guard of parties tried to they'll placate them. We're not going to take on the fight, we're going to try and calm down the tempers. Look what happened. France is in a disastrous political position where the National Rally will win the next presidential election. The same story in Germany. We're going to block the AfD out of Parliament. We're not going to touch the AfD. It boosted their credentials as an anti-establishment party. And it's why I do get both frustrated and worried when the reform rejection, or the lack of an invitation to be at House from John Swinney, because it's not about appeasing reform the party, it's about listening to reform the voters. And we're talking about these places, the places that are most primed to vote for reform are the places that are facing the biggest inequalities. And we all know that reform is not going to fix those inequalities, are going to exacerbate them.
Exactly.
We need to convince voters of that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the good thing, though, I can see once we get into Holyrood and once we get those first minister's questions coming from reform, I mean, it's going to be an absolute bin fire in terms of the way they approach it. And I mean, we could almost have a sweepstakes on who's the first one who's going to get kicked out, because they do have some truly appalling views.
Labour will be the official opposition by Christmas. Reform will not keep 17 MSPs in that parliament. Absolutely not.
It's
but that's not because the public don't support them, it's because they're a basket case.
It's because they're...
It's true. I mean, they've already, since last week, they've already lost quite a few of their councillors that were elected, down in England. Yeah. They've already lost a few of them because they've discovered what they've been saying on social media. And I mean, I agree with you. I mean, when I heard that, Swinney had said he wasn't going to talk to reform, I sort of thought, oh God, well, I wouldn't. I mean, if I was him, no, I wouldn't actually want to be sitting across the table in my nice butte house talking to offered 6 houses offered. I've got 6 houses and umpteen boats and cars. I wouldn't want to be talking to him either. But I did also think that's not the way to do it.
And you're spot on. You're absolutely spot on. Like, the 6 houses offered comment, I think, is actually everywhere.
I know.
And realistically, the day prior to the election, Reform had posted on their social media that under no circumstances would they work with the SNP. So let's just gameplay a scenario here where John Swinney invites Malcolm Offord to Butte House. Malcolm Offord rejects the invitation. See the following weeks, question times, debate nights, ITV, STV interviews. Every SNP politician can go in there and say, 350,000 people in Scotland voted for reform. We invited their leader in to discuss their concerns and see what we can do to address the issues you're facing. They rejected it. 6 House Offord would rather sit in one of these cosy mansions rather than work for the people who elected them. And we will continue to do that job even if reform won't.
Yeah.
But they're through that opportunity in the bin now.
Yeah. And they did that so successfully with the people who didn't support them in the budget, because every time they asked for something, they stood, well, you've asked for this, but you didn't vote for it in the budget, so don't come to me. But the thing that made it worse, I think, was he said, I am not engaging with reform. I am going to have an inclusive parliament. You think, well, you've already just rejected quite a chunk of voters there. Yeah. So I think that's going to have to be softened over time. I don't know who does messaging for the SNP. Have you any idea?
They should all be sacked.
Yeah.
Do we know even who it is? Is there somebody's responsibility?
There was an interview just prior to the election where Mary McAllen was on talking about Thomas Kerr. Everyone loves Thomas Kerr, don't they? Another one of the fist pumps of the day was when David London not only beat Thomas Kerr, but beat him by about 5,000 votes. But Mary McAllen is on, and she actually nailed the messaging, because the messaging was about, I think Reform had just put an advert about immigration, a reserved issue. And Mary McAllen on to, I think it was the BBC One show or something like that, and she had basically said, look, I'll take no lectures on Thomas Kerr on immigration. He came to Glasgow as a Ruth Davidson One Nation Tory, and now he's fighting the Nigel Farage racism wing whilst attacking children in Glasgow who are capable of speaking more than 2 languages. Yes. We should be celebrating that level of diversity in Scotland, not she. And I thought, she's getting the message right. She's not falling back on, well, Thomas can say what he wants, but at the SNP we are doing X, Y, and Z. No, she took the fight straight to the form, and it sounded good. And Stephen Flynn is excellent at it as well. Yeah,
the pair of them hook up or are given the opportunity to do that, a kind of,
That's your face of independence camp.
Get Ross Greer in there as well, because he was brilliant at knocking Ufford off his
Oh, not perch. A fan then.
You don't like Ross Greer?
Policy-wise, I love Ross Greer. I struggle with Ross Greer. I think Ross Greer comes across exactly. I think Gillian Mackay comes across as a lot more authentic. I think.
Oh, I like Ross Greer.
We kind of quite like. I think the pair of them actually are also work well together. So
I think Ross Greer works good in certain spaces.
Yeah. So if we can get Stephen and Mary McAllen actually kind of duo, that might be good going forward. And something you said way back at the beginning, Liam. It's like there are younger people coming through, and that's necessary. That's just needed, and they're good examples of that. We interviewed Sumita Kumar, who is she won the Edinburgh Southwest one. She was just so good. Pair of them were really good, but Sumita Kumar was so pleased that she got in. Yeah,
but I sat and watched the investiture thing where they're saying their oath, and I was going, we interviewed him, we interviewed her, we interviewed her. There was about 8 of them who all got in. I was so pleased, and congratulations to everybody we interviewed who got in. Can I just maybe ask a bit about Westminster now that we've lost 2 big hitters? And I see that Dave Dugan is now Westminster lead. I love Dave Dugan. I really do. I think he's just a hard-working, straight-talking, gets in there, and his current look with the beard, very nice, very nice. So what do we think that the group that are left at Westminster, how can they best support the changes that are made across the whole country? Because you've also got, we know the Northern Irish ones, they just don't take their seats at Westminster because they refuse to swear the oath to the King. Now, ours swallow and swear their oath, but we've also got Welsh MPs in there as well. Is there something they can be doing from the inside to shake things up, do you think?
It's a really, really tough place for them, isn't it? Because Stephen Flynn was really good at getting airtime. I'm not so sure. I think Dave Dugan is a very hard-working MP. I think, first of all, but credit to him. He's done some amazing work in the Westminster Parliament, especially back when the SNP had a larger pool at Westminster. The job of the SNP leader at Westminster is a bit of a tainted pole at the moment, I think, because you're not going to have enough airtime to do much. What you have to be doing is going on to the media outlets down south and making the argument constantly for independence. And the job that the SNP Westminster group have actually has very little to do with Westminster at this point. It's what they do in the media circle rather than what they do at Westminster.
Well, most of us ended up with Labour MPs after the last general election. I got that Graham Downey patsy, but they're almost disenfranchised. They're in a strange position now because having won massive numbers of them at the general election, they've lost any credibility they had because of the Labour results on both sides of the border. So, and I notice quite a few of them are starting to line up behind the let's get rid of Keir queue. So I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of years.
You see, from a strategic point of view, not from a Labour standpoint, because I think as a Labour standpoint, Andy Burnham is their best choice for leader. From a pro-independent standpoint, who would we want as leader of the Labour Party?
Oh, I quite like Keir. He's doing terrible things.
West Streeting, I think, would, because
West
he's rubbish.
Streeting. He would be slimy.
Because
he's slimy.
Like, don't get me wrong, none of them is going to grant a Section 30. Right, we know that. But realistically, I think we have the two best answers. Well, Keir Starmer certainly is doing wonders for the independence campaign. West Streeting is probably your second best bet. I think the ideal scenario, if you're sitting in SNP headquarters right now, is Reform win that Manchester by-election.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wes then triggers a leadership campaign, which drags Angela Rayner into leadership campaign and the Labour Party demise.
Yeah.
For the sake of the country, that's terrible. But for the sake of the independence campaign, I think that's who you're.
That's.
Do you know the other one who would be disastrous for them and wonderful for us? That Rachel Reeves.
Oh,
can you imagine that nasal whine?
She won't get in the chance. She won't get number 11 in 2 months' time, let alone be in number 10.
Yeah, that's true. Well, with that, I mean, with that, kind of scenario in mind of if he didn't get in. I mean, I was listening to the BBC News earlier, and actually, their commentators are all saying that this is not an easy one to win, and Reform will throw absolutely everything at it. So we'll have you back on, Liam, and once that
after that by-election, that was fun.
There's 2 Scottish by-elections to come as well with Stephen.
Well, that's true.
Those will be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I did hear somebody suggest that perhaps Andy Burnham could stand in one of them, and I thought, well, surely he's no chance. But no, it's not going to happen.
That won't work.
Somebody's going to have to stand in them, and that could be interesting.
Yeah.
But
can I make one final comment on those by-elections? I heard one rumour swirling that Angus Robertson was thinking about standing for the Aberdeen seat that Stephen Flynn has stood down, and I think that would be an absolutely disastrous thing for Angus Robertson to do. I think Angus Robertson should take a well-deserved break in Cancun and resign from standing in future. 2 by-elections, the one in Arbroath, I think SNP, I'll put my hat on it right now, if they get their campaign right, they'll win that seat. The one in Aberdeen, I'm really, really worried about. Yeah.
There's a couple of good SNP folk who were turfed out of Westminster last time around, who didn't get in this time, who I would like to see back in. Tommy Shepherd, he's a great speaker. He was on the list, as was Deirdre Brock, who's also very, very good, I think.
It's the old Chinese saying, isn't it? Born in interesting times. It's a bit of a backhander, actually. Certainly interesting for us at the moment.
There's another saying that I really like just now, and it's that things happen very, very slowly, and then suddenly they happen very fast, especially with the Reform and Labour dynamic dance. You can, and the 3 of the 4 parts of the UK, if they play their cards right and put a proper... we could be making constitutional ructions that have actually got nothing to do with a Section 30 order. We could just be having de facto elections and, just, walking out en masse from Westminster. There's so many things that could be happening. Civil disobedience, sign us up, we'll go.
Yeah, we're both up for civil disobedience.
If they start saying no after this big build-up and the expectation that's been raised, I mean, you have got groups like, for example, Believe in Scotland, working behind the scenes, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they've got a few next moves ready. I hope
fingers
so. Anyway,
crossed.
Fingers
that
crossed,
might cheer me up then. I actually feel cheered up having had this conversation with the pair of you, actually. Doors shut and then new doors open, don't they? So we just need to keep looking for the one to walk through.
I think what Marlene said, it's very clear that there is positives to take following that election. My final message is, if there's anyone in SNP headquarters listening, change your messaging. But other than that, I'll bang home to the cows come home about SNP having to change their messaging. But other than that, there's a lot of positives to take from that election. It'll be really interesting to see how the new cabinet does and review how the first maybe 2-3 months of the Parliaments went.
Good. Let's see how it goes. Thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to have a new face on the podcast. Well, that was a glimpse into how Liam was feeling about things and how we're feeling about things. And the ink's not dry on the election results, and already we're thinking about strategy and what can be done differently. What's the next steps? I found it an uplifting conversation to have, and I think we all felt maybe a bit better at the end for having had that opportunity to mull things over. So join us again for our follow-up part 2 programme on the election results, which will be a more detailed look at some of the stats and some of the opinion polling around, of which there is some interesting stuff around. So, but for now, that's it from us.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.